when we're looking at the older American, the average American consumes one serving of fruit and vegetable per day. So that gives us a good insight into kind of what we're missing here. We're missing a lot of vitamins. We're missing a lot of minerals. The average American also doesn't consume enough protein. For those of us that are working in this world, it's kind of weird to hear protein being inadequate, considering that we have a smorgasbord of steak and pork and chicken and everything like that. But if we think about the average person, I was in New York and New Orleans before this, so we got Dunkin' Donuts in New York, and so people may go into Dunkin', we grab a donut and a coffee, and we go to work. Unless you got a little milk with your coffee, you're missing out on protein, right? So we're missing out on protein. We're missing out on a lot of vitamins and minerals, deficient on calcium and vitamin D, which then we're looking at our bone health. We have a tendency for, or it's unfortunate that we start seeing people in their 40s that are having osteoporosis or hip fractures, which is kind of unheard of because that would be an older person's situation when we got older. There's a lot of different things. We're also inadequate in fiber because the diet tends to be more, if we're dealing with more processed foods, then we're not getting enough fiber. And that has an effect on our cholesterol. That has an effect on our bowel regularities. As we're getting older, we also take some medications, and the medications may have an impact on how we digest or process our food. It may lead to constipation, which then makes people not want to do that. Or we could take diuretics, which then make people not want to drink fluids. I don't want to go to the bathroom, so I'm going to not drink fluids, which then places us at increased risk for dehydration or urinary tract infections. So it's a lot. Clearly, the diet has an impact on the body.
Yeah. So I'm glad you went through all that, because we do tend to focus on one single thing and as being, the superfood. And it is much more complicated than that. You just touched on a whole bunch of things, the fiber and its role, and even its role in microbiome diversity. Our diversity of the bacteria in our inside of us has declined compared to, say, people in South America. We've got roughly 1,000 to 1,200 species of bacteria in Americans in our gut. It's about almost 2,000 now in South America, from what I've read. Right. And I'm really glad you mentioned protein. I have gotten over the years pushback by medical professionals when I have said the very same thing you just did. I don't think Americans are getting enough protein. And they said, what are you talking about? We eat way too much protein. I literally just saw an article, and I won't even mention the newsletter. It's a very popular newsletter. It's a nutrition thing. And they just put something out this week. It said, we're not getting enough, or we're getting too much protein in America. And I said to myself, wait a minute, that really conflicts with the latest US dietary guidelines, which specifically highlighted older adults. What is it? 30% of men over 71, 50% of women over 71 not getting enough
protein. Yes. Yeah.
And I for one, was very, it was a catharsis when I first read that. I was like, finally, somebody outside of, you or me or somebody out there who people aren't, maybe not taking it seriously, and there's a lot of people on the internet who will say things, but finally, people are coming to grips with the fact that we're not getting enough protein. And I just thought that was a great thing. And I'm glad you mentioned it. In terms of protein, if we are talking older folks, how much protein should they be consuming per day? I mean, there's the studies say one thing and all that jazz. And, I don't think there is an optimal amount of protein, but what do you say on all this?
So I would say, well, let me back up a sec before I answer that question. You were talking about the protein in adults. I think for us in the active world, we're thinking of people scooping whey protein or soy protein into smoothies and shakes and all that stuff. That is one way to get in protein. But I think when we're focusing on the older adult, we're looking at the fact that they may have limited income. There's also a lack of knowledge when it comes to protein, because people may not think of beans and nuts and seeds as protein. They're thinking animal protein, only animal protein. And so there's a lot of protein options out there that we can consume. When we're looking at older adults, what I tend to say is that we have to be based on our needs for the day, and it's going to be individualized. The person that's very active, they're going to need a little more. The person that's not as active is going to need a little less. I'd say if we were going to convert our weight into kilograms, we're usually looking at a zero 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram for protein. So you've got a 120-pound individual, we're looking at 50 to 60 grams of protein. Now that seems like a lot, but when we start to break it down into ounces and everything like that, it's not that much. One of the things that I like to encourage my people to do is to try, like, it's really important that you try to, like, every time you eat, you try to get a little bit of protein in, because our bodies can really only handle about 30 grams at a time. If we have a bodybuilder and they go and consume like 8 ounces of steak, for example, that sounds great, I'm getting a lot of protein. That unfortunately places the body at some risk for like kidney issues, or you're just stressing the system out way too much, when we'd be better off trying to do a small amount of protein at, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So if we're going to do like a snack and we have some fruit with peanut butter, for example, the peanut butter gives you a little protein, or we can do a yogurt and that gives you some protein. So if we can do protein throughout the day, our body handles it much better than if we try to like smorgasbord it on at one time. Because then, once our body handles or absorbs what it needs, then it's just dealing with a bunch of extra. And unfortunately, that gets converted into fat after we use what we need. Right. So.
And I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of people don't think about that. They think protein and fat are, two different nutrients. We can turn protein into fat if we absolutely have to.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't get discussed very much.
Yeah.
You mentioned a second ago about the nutrition requirements, 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is essentially the RDA, up to about 1. Is it reasonable to say, and you also mentioned body weight for us in that sentence, is it reasonable to say, take your body weight and divide it by 2 and say, that's about amount of grams of protein I should consume per day?
Yeah. 2.2 would be the technical, but yeah, if you divide it by 2, you're getting in the range.
So if you were 200 pounds, about 100 grams of protein.
100 grams. Yeah.
Okay.
And it would be, if you want to be a little more technical about it, if you're less active, you don't need as much. If you're more active, you're going to need a little more. If you go into the gym and you're lifting weights or, doing activities that require more strength, maybe you can go up to 120. And if you don't need as much, or you're not doing as much, maybe you go down to 80,
I think it's good because there's been a few meta-analysis of protein intake and strength trainers over the years. One of the things that I've noticed over the last maybe 5 years or so is there seem to be coming to a conclusion that, yeah, we need a little bit more protein. But what I've seen in some of the research is maybe 0.7 grams to, or maybe 1 gram per pound is appropriate for a lot of people. But
yeah,
I like what we just said a second ago. Take your body weight, divide it by 2, and that's a nice rough estimate of the number of grams per pound.